The snow falling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling Heights corporate penthouse wasn't a symbol of peace. It was a cold, white shroud covering the rot of a dying empire. It was December 31st, the final hours of a year that had stripped me of everything except my name and my resolve. Inside the hall, the air smelled of expensive champagne, pine needles, and the suffocating scent of arrogance. I wasn't there as a guest. I wasn't there as the daughter of the man whose name was etched in gold in the lobby downstairs. To them, to Julian and his circle of vultures, I was Sarah, the invisible girl from the maintenance crew, a ghost in a gray uniform tasked with picking up the discarded remnants of their decadence. Julian stood in the center of the room, his tuxedo tailored to perfection, holding a glass of Cristal that cost more than my monthly salary. He laughed, a loud, grating sound that echoed against the marble walls, while his arm remained draped around Elena, the woman who had been my best friend before she helped him orchestrate the legal coup that ousted me from my father's own board of directors. They thought I was gone. They thought Sarah Sterling had vanished into the shadows of bankruptcy after the accident that took my father's life. They didn't realize that the best way to watch a predator is to become the person they never bother to look at. "Sarah! Over here!" Julian shouted, snapping his fingers without even turning his head to see if I was listening. He didn't recognize me. To a man like Julian, people in uniforms don't have faces. They are just extensions of the furniture. I walked over, my head bowed, holding a plastic tray for his empty glass. He didn't just place it down, he let it slip, allowing the dregs of the sticky golden liquid to splash across my shoes. Elena giggled, a sharp, metallic sound that cut through the soft jazz playing in the background. "Be careful, honey," Elena whispered, her eyes dancing with a cruel, polished malice. "We wouldn't want the help to ruin the hardwood before the big countdown. Julian, darling, tell her she needs to clear the catering tables in the East Wing. Someone spilled red wine, and it looks absolutely dreadful. It's almost midnight. We can't have the new year starting with a stain." I nodded, keeping my voice a low, gravelly rasp. "Yes, sir. Right away, ma'am." My fingers tightened around the edge of the tray. Every insult, every snap of the fingers, every drop of wine I was forced to scrub was another byte of data being uploaded to the server I had spent 6 months bypassing. They saw a maid. They didn't see the encrypted drive taped to the underside of my cleaning cart. They didn't see the miniature high-gain antenna disguised as a bottle of window cleaner, currently siphoning the final, encrypted fragments of Julian's private ledger from the secure executive network. The humiliation was a tool. The more they belittled me, the more invisible I became. I spent the next hour on my knees, scrubbing a floor that was already clean, while the elite of the city talked openly about their offshore accounts, their manipulated stock prices, and the unfortunate demise of Thomas Sterling. They talked about my father as if he were a footnote in their climb to the top. Julian bragged to a group of investors about how he had liquidated the Sterling legacy to fund his new luxury development in the Maldives. He joked about how Thomas's daughter was probably wasting away in some dive bar, unaware that the very woman he was mocking was currently 3 feet away, wiping his footprints off the tiles. "The beauty of New Year's Eve," Julian said, raising his voice to command the room, "is that we leave the trash of the past behind. We sweep away the old failures to make room for the new masters of the world. To the future!" The room erupted in cheers. I watched from the shadows near the service door. The irony was a bitter pill, but I swallowed it with a smile they couldn't see. He was right about one thing. The trash was about to be discarded. As the clock ticked toward 11:15 p.m., the pressure in the room shifted. The guests were intoxicated on power and alcohol. Julian became even more reckless. He called me over again, this time to clear a mountain of oyster shells and lobster tails that had been discarded near the DJ booth. As I bent down, he leaned in. his breath smelling of gin and ego. "You know," he muttered, loud enough for his inner circle to hear, "you're far too young to be scrubbing floors, Sarah. If that's even your name. If you worked half as hard on your appearance as you do on these floors, you might have found a man to take care of you. But I suppose some people are just born to serve, aren't they? It's a biological imperative. The strong lead, and the weak. Well, the weak clean up the mess." He reached out and patted my cheek, a gesture so patronizing it made my skin crawl. Elena laughed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Don't tease her, Julian. She's doing a wonderful job. Look at that shine. We should give her a tip. A New Year's bonus." She reached into her clutch, pulled out a single crumpled dollar bill, and dropped it into the bucket of dirty water I was carrying. It floated there, soaking up the gray, soapy liquid. "Thank you, ma'am," I whispered. "It's exactly what I deserve." I turned away, the weight of the drive in my pocket feeling like a loaded weapon. I retreated to the utility closet in the hallway, the only place where the cameras didn't reach. I pulled out my laptop, a rugged, high-performance machine hidden behind stacks of industrial-grade bleach. The progress bar on the screen was at 98%. My heart was a drum, beating against my ribs with the rhythm of a war march. These files weren't just spreadsheets. They were the digital DNA of Julian's crimes, the forged signatures that stole my company, the communication logs with the contractors who ensured my father's car never made it home that rainy night in May, the evidence of a massive Ponzi scheme that would wipe out every person in that ballroom if it ever went public. And it was going public. I watched the final 1% crawl across the screen. This was the pinnacle of my seasonal revenge. While they prepared to toast to their continued theft of the future, I was preparing to hit the delete key on their lives. The clock on the wall read 11:30 p.m. In 30 minutes, the ball would drop in Times Square, and a different kind of ball would drop right here in the Sterling penthouse. I began the final sequence, routing the data through a series of anonymous servers that would blast the contents of Julian's private black folder to the SEC, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the country simultaneously. But I had one more special destination for the files. I had hacked the internal projector system for the party. Julian wanted a grand countdown. I would give him one he would never forget. I would give him a countdown to his own destruction, narrated by the very evidence he thought he had buried with my father. I felt a cold, sharp clarity, the humiliation of the last few months, the smell of the cleaning chemicals, the sting of that dollar bill hitting the water. It was all fuel. I wasn't just Sarah the maid anymore. I was the ghost of Sterling Heights, and I was about to reclaim my throne. The clock reached 11:35 p.m., and the atmosphere in the penthouse shifted from festive to feral. The more the guests drank, the more they shed their masks of civility, revealing the predatory nature that had brought them to the top of the corporate food chain. I emerged from the utility closet, my gray uniform a camouflage that allowed me to drift through the crowd like a silent observer of a dying civilization. I carried a fresh tray of flutes, weaving through the clusters of millionaires who were busy discussing how they would spend their next quarterly bonuses. They looked through me, their eyes sliding over my form as if I were a ghost. I was no longer a person to them. I was merely a mobile furniture piece that provided alcohol. Julian was in rare form, standing near the massive fireplace where the stockings of his loyal executives hung like trophies. He was holding court, regaling the crowd with the story of how he had outsmarted the old guard. He didn't mention my father by name, but he didn't have to. Every word was a barb, aimed at the memory of Thomas Sterling. He spoke of inefficiency, sentimental leadership, and the necessity of ruthless evolution. He was justifying his theft under the guise of progress. Elena stood by his side, preening, her diamonds reflecting the firelight. She was wearing a necklace that had belonged to my mother, a piece of jewelry that had been missing since the day of the funeral. Seeing it around her neck sent a jolt of ice through my veins. but I kept my hands steady. "Service!" Julian barked, not even looking my way. I stepped forward, offering the tray. As he took a glass, he noticed the dampness of my sleeve, a result of the bonus Elena had dropped in my bucket earlier. He made a face of pure disgust, as if my presence were polluting the very air he breathed. "Look at this," Julian said, grabbing my wrist and lifting my arm for the guests to see. "This is what happens when you hire from the bottom of the barrel." She's dripping on the Persian rug. "Tell me, girl, is it difficult to perform even the simplest task without making a mess? Do you realize this rug costs more than the house you probably live in?" A few of the younger executives chuckled, eager to please their boss. I looked Julian straight in the eyes, a breach of the unwritten rules of the help. For a brief second, his brow furrowed, a flicker of recognition dancing behind his pupils, but he quickly dismissed it. To him, it was impossible that the woman he had destroyed was standing in front of him. He saw only a defiant servant who needed to be put in her place. "I'm sorry, sir," I said, my voice steady and devoid of the submissive tremor he expected. "I'll ensure the mess is cleaned up before the clock strikes 12. I've always been very thorough with my cleaning." "See that you are," he spat, releasing my wrist with a flick of his hand, as if he had touched something diseased. "In fact, I want you to stay right here in the main hall. I want you to see what real success looks like. Maybe some of it will rub off on you, though I highly doubt it. Some people are just destined to be the dirt under the boots of history." He turned back to his audience, dismissing me entirely. I moved to the perimeter of the room, positioned perfectly near the control panel for the grand audiovisual system. My laptop was still active in the closet, connected to the house network via a hidden bridge. I pulled out my phone, a burner I had synced to the system, and checked the upload status. 100%. The servers were primed. The New Year's gift was wrapped and ready. At 11:45 p.m., the festive part of the evening began. Julian took the stage, a small platform set up in front of a massive 200-inch LED screen that usually displayed stock tickers or promotional videos of his achievements. He tapped the microphone, the feedback whining through the room and silencing the chatter. "Friends, partners, and those who are smart enough to follow my lead," Julian began, his voice booming with unearned authority. "As we stand on the threshold of a new year, I want to take a moment to reflect on our journey. We took a crumbling, stagnant company and turned it into a powerhouse. We trimmed the fat, we removed the obstacles, and tonight we celebrate the fact that the Sterling name is finally synonymous with one thing: my vision." The screen behind him flashed to a montage of his year, photos of him at ribbon cuttings, handshakes with corrupt politicians, and shots of the new skyline he was building over the ruins of my father's charitable projects. It was a monument to ego. I watched the guests applaud, their faces illuminated by the glow of the screen. They were all complicit. Every person in this room had benefited from the dismantling of my family's legacy. They had stayed silent while Julian purged the honest employees, and they had cheered when the stock price rose on the news of my father's death. "But tonight isn't just about looking back," Julian continued, his eyes gleaming with a manic energy. "At the stroke of midnight, I will be signing the final merger papers that will consolidate our power across the entire eastern seaboard. We aren't just a company anymore. We are a dynasty." He gestured to a small table on the stage where a leather-bound folder sat. In his mind, that folder contained the future. In reality, it was a tombstone. I felt a surge of adrenaline. The humiliation of the evening, the spilled wine, the insults, the dollar bill in the dirty water. It all felt like a distant memory now. I was the one holding the leash. I moved closer to the stage, blending in with the catering staff who were preparing the final round of champagne for the countdown. I saw Elena whispering to one of the investors, pointing at me and laughing. She was likely telling the story of the clumsy maid to entertain her new friends. I smiled at her. a genuine, terrifyingly calm smile. She frowned, confused by my lack of shame, but I didn't care. 10 minutes to go, the DJ shouted, his voice amplified by the massive speakers. The energy in the room hit a fever pitch. People were hugging, kissing, and making empty promises about the year to come. Julian was at the center of it all, the sun around which these sycophants orbited. He thought he was invincible. He thought he had won. He had forgotten the most basic rule of power. It only lasts as long as the secrets it's built upon remain hidden. I reached into my pocket and pressed a sequence of keys on my phone. The screen behind Julian flickered for a millisecond, a tiny glitch that no one noticed. The transition was ready. I had replaced his Dynasty video with a different kind of presentation. I had titled it, "The Sterling Audit." 5 minutes! Julian reached for the leather-bound folder, his pen poised. He wanted to sign it exactly at midnight, a symbolic gesture for the press release that would go out in the morning. He looked out at the crowd, his chest puffed out, the king of his own hollow mountain. I positioned myself right at the foot of the stage, looking up at him. This time, I didn't bow my head. I stood tall, my shoulders back, the gray uniform no longer a mark of shame, but a suit of armor. "Why are you still standing there?" Julian hissed, leaning over the edge of the stage as the music swelled. "I told you to clean up the mess. Go find a broom, you pathetic girl." "Oh, Julian," I said, my voice cutting through the noise with a clarity that finally made him stop. "The mess is already cleaned. I'm just here to watch the trash get taken out." His eyes widened. The recognition finally hit him. He saw the fire in my eyes, the shape of my jaw, the ghost of the man he had murdered standing right in front of him in the skin of his maid. "Sarah," he whispered, the name falling from his lips like a curse. "Happy New Year, Julian," I replied. The clock on the wall struck 11:58 p.m. The room began to chant, a rhythmic tribal roar of 10, 9, 8. Julian's face had drained of all color, his hand trembling as he held the expensive fountain pen over the merger documents. He looked from me to the massive screen, his instinct finally screaming that the trap had been sprung. He tried to speak, call security, but the sound of the crowd drowned him out. Elena noticed his distress and stepped closer, her hand reaching for the necklace that didn't belong to her. "Julian, what's wrong?" she shouted over the noise. He couldn't answer. He was staring at me as I tapped the final command on my phone. 3, 2, 1, Happy New Year! The cannons fired, spraying silver and gold confetti over the crowd. The Auld Lang Syne melody began to play, but it was abruptly cut off by a piercing, high-frequency digital screech. The festive imagery of Julian's Dynasty vanished from the 200-inch screen. In its place, a giant high-definition image of my father, Thomas Sterling, appeared. He was in his office, looking tired but resolute, holding a document to the camera. The ballroom went dead silent. The champagne flutes stayed frozen halfway to 100 mouths. "If you are seeing this," my father's voice boomed through the professional-grade sound system, "it means Julian Vane has succeeded in his attempt to silence me, but he has failed to silence the truth." The video cut to a rapid-fire scroll of the private files I had leaked. Documents with Julian's forged signatures flashed across the screen in red boxes. Audio recordings began to play. Crisp, clear captures of Julian and Elena discussing how to dispose of the Sterling majority shares and how to ensure the brake lines on my father's car were adequately weathered. The socialites in the room gasped, drifting away from Julian as if he were suddenly radioactive. "This is a lie!" Julian screamed, turning to the crowd, his eyes wild. "It's a deep fake! Security! Shut it down!" But the security team was busy staring at their own phones. I had ensured the leak hit every employee's device simultaneously. The black folder was now public property. On the screen, the evidence shifted to the Ponzi scheme. Names of people in that very room began to scroll under the heading, "Total Loss of Investment." The celebratory mood turned into a riot of panic in seconds. Men in tuxedos began to shout, realizing their fortunes had been evaporated by the man they were just toasting. I stepped onto the stage, walking past the frozen Elena. I reached out and redirected the spotlight so it hit Julian directly, pinning him like a bug under a microscope. He looked small. He looked pathetic. The new year he had dreamed of was over before the first minute had passed. "The police are downstairs, Julian," I said, my voice amplified by the microphone he had left active, "and the SEC, and the board members you didn't manage to bribe. They aren't here for the party. They're here for the trash." Elena tried to bolt toward the exit, but a group of angry investors blocked her path, their faces twisted in rage. One woman, who had lost millions in Julian's scheme, reached out and snatched the necklace off Elena's neck. "This was never yours," she hissed. Elena fell to her knees, sobbing, the glamour of the night stripping away to reveal the hollow shell underneath. Julian turned to me, his face contorted with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "You think you've won? You're still nothing. You're just a maid in a cheap uniform. I built this. I own this city. You own a jail cell," I replied coldly. "And as for the uniform, I think I'm done with it." I reached up and unzipped the gray maintenance jumpsuit, stepping out of it to reveal the midnight blue silk dress I had been wearing underneath all along, a dress that had belonged to my mother, the rightful queen of this empire. I stood before the ruined elite of the city, no longer Sarah the maid, but Sarah Sterling, the majority shareholder of Sterling Heights. At that moment, the elevator doors at the back of the hall hissed open. It wasn't more guests. It was a phalanx of federal agents and dark-suited investigators. They moved through the confetti and the discarded lobster tails with clinical precision. They didn't even look at the other guests. They headed straight for the stage. "Julian Vane," the lead agent asked, holding up a warrant, "you are under arrest for securities fraud, grand larceny, and we have new evidence regarding the homicide of Thomas Sterling." The room erupted into a different kind of noise, the sound of camera flashes and the frantic whispers of the fallen. Julian didn't fight. He collapsed into his chair, the leather-bound merger folder falling to the floor and sliding into the puddle of dirty water where Elena had dropped that $1 bill earlier. The bonus he had given me was now soaking into the very documents that were supposed to be his legacy. I walked to the edge of the stage and looked out over the city. The fireworks were still going off over the harbor, bursts of light illuminating the new year. For the first time in months, I could breathe. The air didn't smell like bleach or arrogance anymore. It smelled like justice. As the agents led Julian away in handcuffs, his expensive tuxedo rumpled and his spirit broken, he looked back at me one last time. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a frown or a taunt. I simply raised a glass of the champagne he had paid for and gave him a small, silent nod. The party was over. The cleanup was complete. And for the first time in my life, the Sterling name didn't represent a company or a building. It represented the woman who had lost everything and had the courage to take it all back while the world was looking the other way. I walked toward the exit, stepping over the crumpled dollar bill and the ruined documents. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea, their eyes filled with a new kind of fear, the fear of someone who knows how to wait, how to watch, and how to win. "Happy New Year," I whispered to the empty air of the lobby. The empire was mine again, and this time, I wouldn't be building it on secrets. I would be building it on the ruins of the people who thought they could bury me. The snow was still falling outside, but it didn't look like a shroud anymore. It looked like a clean slate.